Lawrence Stroll's latest comments about Aston Martin are brutal, not because they lower expectations, but because they dismantle a narrative that many inside and outside the paddock had begun to accept uncritically. Rather than selling 2026 as an immediate breakthrough, Stroll has publicly acknowledged that Aston Martin is entering the most complex phase of its existence as a Formula One team, one where ambition must be matched by patience, structure, and long-term discipline. In a sport where optimism is often weaponized, this level of realism is both uncomfortable and revealing. The timing of Stroll's statement is crucial. Formula One is approaching the most disruptive regulation reset since the start of the turbo-hybrid era in 2014. New power units, a 50-50 split between electrical and combustion power, the removal of the MGU-H, active aerodynamics, and fully sustainable fuels are not incremental changes. They represent a fundamental rewrite of how performance is generated, managed, and sustained over a race distance. Stroll's words reflect an understanding that no team, regardless of resources, can shortcut this transition. At the center of Aston Martin's transformation is its move to become a full works team with Honda in 2026. Stroll emphasized that this is a completely different challenge compared to running customer power units. When a team receives an engine from a supplier, integration is largely reactive. When a team builds its car around a power unit developed exclusively for it, every decision becomes interdependent. Chassis architecture, cooling philosophy, aerodynamic packaging, center of gravity, and even suspension layout must be designed in parallel with the power unit, not around it. This is why Stroll's call for patience with Honda is so significant. Honda is not entering Formula One as an unknown entity. It arrives as a manufacturer that has powered multiple world championships with Red Bull. Yet Stroll refuses to rely on reputation alone. He openly states that Honda needs time to develop its new power unit under radically different rules, and that expecting instant supremacy would be unrealistic. That admission alone separates Aston Martin's messaging from most of its rivals. The removal of the MGU-H fundamentally changes how power units behave. Energy recovery becomes less complex in some areas, but far more critical in others. Electrical deployment, battery management, thermal efficiency, and fuel interaction now define competitiveness. These systems do not mature overnight. Stroll's comments implicitly acknowledge that early season reliability issues, performance variability, and development swings are not just possible, but likely across the grid. Aston Martin's decision to commit to this project despite those risks highlights how fundamentally the team's philosophy has shifted. Under Lawrence Stroll's ownership, the early focus was on rapid competitiveness. The surge at the start of 2023 reflected that approach. However, the regression that followed exposed the limits of short-term optimization without structural depth. Stroll's latest message suggests that those lessons have been internalized. The scale of Aston Martin's transformation becomes clearer when examining how infrastructure, personnel, and regulation philosophy are now being treated as a single system rather than isolated upgrades. The new Silverstone factory is not simply a modern workspace or a branding statement. It is a functional response to the realities of the cost cap era. It is designed to allow parallel development streams, tighter feedback loops between aerodynamics, vehicle dynamics, and power unit integration, and faster decision-making under strict resource limits. Lawrence Stroll's remarks make it clear that bricks and machinery were never the end goal. They were the foundation upon which a far more complex human and technical structure had to be built. That structure revolves around people, and no arrival symbolizes that more than Adrian Newey. However, Stroll is careful not to present Newey as a miracle solution. This is a crucial distinction. Newey's value does not lie in isolated brilliance, but in how his design philosophy reshapes the entire organization. He approaches regulation changes by questioning assumptions, identifying conceptual freedom early, and designing cars as integrated systems rather than collections of optimized parts. Allowing that way of thinking to influence every department requires time, trust, and organizational stability, especially when paired with a brand new power unit partnership. Newey himself has already hinted at why 2026 is such a fertile ground for innovation. He has openly stated that the new regulations offer more flexibility than initially meets the eye, echoing the same assessment he made ahead of the 2022 ground effect reset. That observation is not trivial. In 2022, teams that treated the rules as restrictive struggled, while those that explored their conceptual margins gained decisive advantages. Stroll's patience aligns directly with this philosophy. Aston Martin is not rushing to validate surface-level performance. It is allowing time for deeper interpretation to mature. The integration challenge becomes even more complex when considering the technical leadership structure Aston Martin has assembled. Alongside Newey, figures like Andy Cowell and Enrico Cardile bring immense experience, but also distinct engineering cultures. Cowell's background in power unit optimization and long-term program management contrasts with Cardile's chassis and aerodynamic expertise. Aligning these perspectives under a unified vision is not automatic. Stroll openly acknowledges that assembling elite engineers is only half the task. The harder part is ensuring clarity of authority, alignment of priorities, and coherence in technical direction. The 2026 regulations magnify why this alignment phase is unavoidable. Active aerodynamics fundamentally change how cars behave over a lap. Front and rear wing elements will dynamically adjust between corners and straights, altering load distribution, balance and drag characteristics in real time. This introduces new demands on control software, actuator reliability, and driver confidence. These systems must operate seamlessly under race conditions, often in response to external inputs such as energy availability or track position, long before absolute performance is optimized. At the same time, the new power unit rules radically reshape energy management. With the MGU-H removed and electrical contribution rising to approximately 50%, performance becomes far more sensitive to battery efficiency, thermal stability, and deployment strategy. These are not areas where instant gains are realistic. They require sustained development, extensive validation, and careful integration with the chassis and aerodynamic platform. Stroll's insistence on patience reflects an understanding that premature judgment in such an environment is more damaging than initial underperformance. Importantly, Stroll does not present patience as a shield against criticism. He explicitly states that expectations remain as high as they can possibly be. The distinction he draws is between ambition and immediacy. Aston Martin is not lowering its goals, it is refusing to compress a multi-year transformation into a single launch window. Under the 2026 rules will require not just innovation, but the ability to adapt concepts rapidly as understanding evolves. That adaptability cannot be built under constant pressure to deliver instant results. This approach also fundamentally reshapes Aston Martin's relationship with Honda. By publicly stating that development time is necessary, Stroll removes the illusion of instant competitiveness that often distorts manufacturer partnerships. Honda is given the space to prioritize robustness, scalability, and learning. rather than chasing early peak numbers that compromise long-term potential. In a regulation cycle where reliability issues are widely expected, this may prove to be one of Aston Martin's most important strategic advantages. Stroll's comments also redefine how success should be measured in 2026. Rather than focusing solely on early race results, he implicitly shifts attention toward learning rate, system stability, and conceptual convergence. Teams that understand their cars quickly and refine efficiently will outperform those that peak early but stagnate. This is a subtle but sophisticated reframing of expectations, one that few team owners articulate publicly. The so-called brutality of Stroll's statement lies in its refusal to provide comfort. There are no promises of podiums, no guarantees of fighting at the front from race one, and no attempt to soften the scale of the challenge. Instead, there is a direct acknowledgement that becoming a works team under a full regulation reset is one of the hardest tasks in Formula One. That honesty forces fans, media, and rivals to recalibrate how progress should be judged. From a competitive standpoint, this mindset is quietly threatening. History shows that teams willing to absorb early discomfort without organizational panic often emerge strongest once regulations stabilize. By committing to patience now, Aston Martin positions itself to exploit the second phase of the regulation cycle, where understanding, integration, and refinement outweigh raw innovation.